everybody, and hi everyone on the Zoom. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to thank Steve Orr, I want to make sure I get it right, Margaret Cooker, Mike Page, and Jim Barnes for making this happen. I really wanted to have a chance to meet Rotary of Victorville, so I'm good now, I think.
You are.
We have to put my son on a plane on Tuesday, so I have to make sure that I don't get near anybody. So, you know, it's crazy times we're living in. And I really want to thank you and all the Rotary for the backpack program, because there's nothing that's more important for kids than to have as much normalcy as possible. I personally have 2 teenagers, so I completely understand, but it's especially the elementary school age kids who are so affected right now. And I've noticed that a lot of educator parents have been online lately showing their kids back to school pictures. They're having the kids get dressed up, they're going through their traditions and routines. And you know, my mom was an educator as well, so she used to line us up on the front porch every time. And so, you know, that's what people need to be doing is, you know, our kids, we make them do it too, even though they've grown every time. So I really wanted to meet you all, and it seemed like a good topic that I would be able to share some knowledge about, and I'm really hoping that this can be a lot of time for Q&A, because this is a complicated issue. But you know, people want to know, why are drugs so expensive? We ask that all the time. And so I thought I'd just take you through it, and then again, you can ask me any questions. There are solutions. We have the opportunity to make changes in this area, but it's going to take people all working together in order to do it. So I have a quick quiz. Does anybody know what the number $41.7 billion means in our country? That's the NIH budget for drugs. And so, you know, we spend a lot of money on research in our country, which is why we have some amazing cures and therapies. Here's another number that I was curious if anybody could guess. What? And I made a deck, but since we're outside, it's 82.1 billion. Does anybody know what that represents? Yeah, we wish, right? That's actually the revenues of Johnson & Johnson, which is a familiar company that we figured everyone would know. So, you know, we're talking about enormous sums of money that go into the healthcare system with regard to drugs. So I thought I'd just start by talking a little bit about the history of medical research and development and how this all has come to be. So basically, as you know, there's basic research and development that happens at universities in our country, it happens at government institutions, and it happens in private industry as well. So the challenge and the interesting thing here is that a lot of the basic research, when we're looking for cures for cancer or Alzheimer's, it's actually done by NIH grants. It's not even done by the companies. So quite often, they're able to license technology that's pretty far down the development path. And by the way, if anybody has questions about vaccines at the end, I've been keeping up on what's happening with COVID vaccines, so I'd be happy to answer those questions. So then companies, once they invest in the research and development themselves or license it in, there's a patent involved. So that gives them some degree of protection to try to make back the money that they invested. So what happens is that companies have to set a price that will recoup their initial investment. But I'm going to get into some specifics later about one drug and show you how it can go wrong for the patients, the end users, and the physicians who want to take care of them, just based on the way our system works. So when drugs are first introduced, they're introduced at the highest cost that the company feels that they can gain in order to recoup their investment, right? So if a company spends $1 billion in the development of a drug, then they're going to try to, as quickly as possible, because the patent life for a drug, I don't know if you know this, it's 17 years. But that clock starts ticking from the day that they start development, and it usually takes close to 10 years. So they have about 7 years to make their money back. And so depending on how many patients there are and what they're going to charge, they're trying to make, and I'm just spitballing this, but it just helps. They're trying to make the $1 to $2 billion as quickly as possible because then everything else after that is profit for the company. And look, I worked in biotech my whole career, so I understand that these companies deserve to get the returns that they've invested in. But where it goes awry, I will get to in just a minute. I want to talk to you about a drug called Gleevec. So, this is my friend, Stephen Martin. And if anybody came, we had a healthcare town hall at the fairgrounds last September, and he came and spoke. Stephen's now 30. When he was 26 years old, he went in for a regular blood test and found out that the clinic called him and said, you need to get to an emergency room right away. He had CML, or chronic myelogenous leukemia. That is a disease that most often happens to people in their 70s and older. He was 26. There's a lot of reasons why it's starting to happen in younger people, but it creates a very different scenario because most people who have CML have Medicare. They're not young people trying to work, and so it can get very complicated very quickly. Fortunately, a company called Novartis discovered a therapy called Gleevec back in the 90s, and it has saved people's lives. So in the past, about 80% of people with CML would not live 10 years. Now, 20% of people are not living that long, and it's all because of this one drug. But here's what happened. When the therapy was introduced, the company knew that they needed to try to make back their initial investment as quickly as possible. So the closest therapy was something called interferon. I'm sure many of you have maybe needed it. So the way that Gleevec was priced was that it was 20% more expensive than interferon. And the reason they thought that they should price it that way was because they then realized that they only had a couple of years, there wasn't that much patent life left, and they also didn't know how long the patients would live, to be honest. Well, this drug was a miracle drug, and patients started to live. So not only were there more patients with CML, because those who would have died now were living, but as new cases came in, there were just more and more patients. So all of a sudden, this drug became a many $billion-a-year drug for the company. And they also were able to use some of the tricks of the trade, for lack of a better term, and you can find ways to extend your patent life. So Gleevec was now costing our country billions and billions of dollars a year, but these people were living, so it was a positive outcome, and everybody was happy. But as time went on, it's just getting more and more expensive, and so what tends to happen then is when a product's about to go generic, then that's the time that last reference price that the brand name drug charged before the generic comes in sets the market going forward. And companies are also able to delay the generic companies. So in that process, that's how we got, this very expensive cancer therapy. Now, as other cancer therapies, and Gleevec was early on in Gleevec's a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. So these new kinds of drugs that aren't chemicals necessarily, but they are either new kinds of molecules or biotechnology drugs. So then what happened was many new therapies that came in for patients who became resistant to Gleevec were more expensive. And it just drove cancer drug prices through the roof. So that's where we are today. Does anybody have any questions before I go on about that?
How much does that drug cost?
Okay, so very good question, and I was going to, so it started at $30,000 a year. Guess what and that was back in the 90s. Guess what it costs today? Can anyone guess what 1 year of Gleevec is? It's $146. Because the companies take a price increase every year. As you know, you've seen your prices go up. If you have to pay out of pocket for anything, you know that drugs are getting more and more expensive. So Gleevec topped out at $146,000 a year. Now, Novartis recouped their investment decades ago. And so that's the situation that people find themselves in. Now, Stephen's situation is even harder because he's a young person. He actually can't work because he had insurance, but it couldn't come close to covering the cost of his medication, and he had side effects. So while he was going through his initial therapy, he stopped working, but now he's on Medi-Cal, and Medi-Cal covers it. But if he were to go get a job, then he no longer is able to get his medicine that's keeping him alive. Yes, thank you, Lindsay, it's hot. So that's where we are, and that's just one example. There are hundreds of examples like that, but I'm happy to share them with you. So, you know, the other thing is, Gleevec is not covered by Medicare, and that's a whole different conversation about how cancer drugs are paid for. If they're injectable, they're covered by Medicare. If they're oral, they're not. But there's a coupon called Single Care where you can get it for $4,300 a month. But I mean, come on, like a senior who has to pay $4,300 a month for a drug that keeps them alive. These are real conundrums that we've created in our country. And by contrast, I just want to tell you how it works in Europe. You know, basically, in Europe, it's mandated, and in all the other countries, really Canada, the 5 European countries, Japan, Korea, they have to complete a value-based proposition before they're allowed to price their drugs. So if something costs $100,000 in our country, it's probably about 60 in Germany, 50 in France, Italy, and Spain, 40 in the UK, and about 50 in Canada. So a lot of people say, well, okay, let's just import our drugs from Canada. But that's just putting a Band-Aid on a really bad situation. So, you know, there are bipartisan bills that are under consideration right now. One was H.R. 3, but now they're calling it the Elijah Cummings Lower Drug Costs Now Act. And basically what that says is that we have to be able to allow government payers, mainly Medicare, to negotiate drug prices. And that probably sounds like, what? Wait, Medicare can't negotiate drug prices? But they can. It's statutorily protected because the pharmaceutical industry is very good at making sure things are written, you know, to keep them the way they want them to be. And look, I worked in the industry. There are lots of good people. Most people who work in that industry are doing it to save lives. So I'm not suggesting that, you know, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just stating facts because I'm really about facts and data, right? And the facts are that we're paying more in this country than anywhere else in the world. And then, you know, another argument that comes up then is, but wait a second, if we're paying more than anywhere else in the world, we're the only ones developing new drugs. Look at the COVID vaccines. They're coming from Germany, they're coming from the UK, there's an Israeli company, there's a couple American companies, there's even, you know, South Korean company has a vaccine in development. There are about 140 in development, and there's 16 that are actively going through testing. And there's an Indian company. Innovation happens everywhere. So to say that, you know, we just have to keep funding this system that is, the incentives are backwards just because it's always been that way, to me, doesn't make any sense. I want to make sure that everyone in this country has access to quality, affordable health care that they can, you know, afford, but also that allows us to continue to move forward in making sure that everyone can get treated when they get cancer and it doesn't cause such a disruption in their life. We've all had such a disruption already, you know, and you can imagine that when individuals have diagnoses like this, it's really hard. So at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if, go ahead.
Yeah, how much does insurance play a role in this? Because I see that all the time.
That's a really good question. Thanks for asking. So one of the challenges is that, as you all probably know, we have a multi-layered system of payment for things in this country. And private insurance is the place where a lot of the cost gets shifted, particularly for hospitalizations and things, but also for drugs. So even though Medicare can't negotiate for prices, that kind of sets like the baseline bar for our country for many, many complicated reasons. And so the private healthcare system does lend difficulty to that. Now that said, there's many models in the world. Germany has a basic level of insurance for everyone and then private insurance on top of it so they can still have, you know, first world development of therapies and things like that. So, you know, that's something to look at. But yes, the way that we pay for things actually contributes to prices going up, if there's not a generic equivalent. And there's always
It
caveats.
has to be 17 years before a generic can come out when the patent's over, or is it usually less?
Well, so the drug usually gets on the market after maybe 10, typically. It's all different. And then they have 7 years to recoup it. But don't forget that, remember I mentioned, they have ways. Like if you change one molecule on a therapy and patent that and then bring it to market, you've just bought yourself 17 more years. And that's a lot of way that they string together the kinds of treatments that keep prices high. Jim?
So we're talking about in pricing for prescription drugs in different countries. Is the main developer manufacturer selling internationally, having different prices in different countries, or is that drug, so they're going to market, they know they can sell them in this country for this much and this much here, just market driven?
Oh, absolutely. So the one manufacturer will market worldwide. And so, absolutely, certainly, when we launched one of the drugs I worked on, we had to make these portfolios of cost-effectiveness studies for Europe that we weren't required to present in the United States. In the US, you could charge whatever you want. That's the bottom line. Yes.
So, on the games that they play, of course, I had that where I had a long-term medication that I'm on, that they put a capsule on it, and all of a sudden changed the name of the drug, and it no longer was on patent and all that. But the good thing was the insurance company caught up with that and said, no, there's other things out there, and it actually made things better. So I saw that the insurance companies saw the games that the pharmaceuticals played, and when they could, they forced the doctors to find another way to go about it. So that's just a positive that I saw with insurance, but I also saw the game was played. The other part, is it possible, and I don't know, that American companies, because of how much they spend on research and development, and isn't it possible they're actually doing more than the other, boutique organizations that may be finding COVID-19? They have so many products they're working on. Isn't that part of it? They're trying to recoup, because instead of doing 10 different trials, they may be doing 150 different trials. Isn't that part of their cost? I'm not trying in any way to make good on the pharmaceutical companies. I'm just saying, isn't that a part of it? Is that the big ones are doing so many trials, so many diseases they're trying to conquer?
You know, you make two great points. So the first one is, I really want to stop for a second on your point that the insurance companies do figure this out and then they set up roadblocks. It's called step therapy, is one of the mechanisms they use. But have you ever gone to your doctor and they said, I really want to give you drug X, but I'm not allowed because we have to try A and B first, and I know they're not going to work, so you just call me and tell me it didn't work, and then we'll get to drug X. Those are the kinds of things that, can you imagine? I don't know if there are any doctors in the room, but the hoops that our doctors have to jump through to go through our, twisted and contorted payment system is a real bummer. A lot of doctors I know say they just like to have Medicare patients because they know what they're going to be paid, because Medicare has set payment system. It's electronic, and they get their money electronically. Whereas when it's private insurance, they have to have extra staff to just try to get through all those machinations. So your point is good, it can help, but it can also be detrimental to somebody who doesn't have the time to go through 3 old generics and they just need the newer drug. It just depends, right? Blood thinners is a great example, so I don't know if anybody takes blood thinners, but there are newer blood thinners that are better and they require a lot less monitoring. But a lot of people are forced to take the old ones and go in for monitoring. And during a pandemic, when you have to go in for blood work all the time and you're older, that's putting you at increased risk. So again, super complicated, but we need to streamline the whole thing. And then finally, your second question was about the investment. Yes, United States companies invest more than anybody else in the world, but it's not just their companies' investments, it's also that our government invests more than anybody in the world, but so do other companies. So the truth is, it could be more efficient. Companies would be more efficient if they were forced to. That's the bottom line. Because right now, there's just few incentives for them to rationalize it, only bring to market new therapies that are truly innovative, not just a little bit better, like, you take your once-a-day blood pressure pill or a twice-a-day blood pressure pill and turn it into once a day, and they double the price. Well, I mean, how many of us would be willing to just take it twice a day so it didn't have to cost so much, right? Those are the kinds of things that are allowed to continue to happen because of the way we pay for it, to be honest.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Where can we go to get the quality of care that you mentioned about Germany and all those other countries in their, you just call it level of care? Where can we go to find that? What research has been done to show that Germany and France and Canada and all of those, I don't want to say big controversial words, but their level of care for each person. Like here, Medicare, Medi-Cal does not get the same quality of care as somebody with Kaiser, Blue Shield, or Blue Cross. I personally seen it, lived it, and dealt with it. I've had to pay for family members to have a bottle of metformin because the insurance company wouldn't cover it. So where's the statistic? Where can we go to find that research ourselves so that we can make an informed decision on how to turn our situation around?
Can I answer that?
Yes,
Or
go
would that
ahead.
be inappropriate?
No, it's fine. This is a discussion.
Stand up at least, Steve.
Yeah.
Well,
Do you want the mic?
Obviously, no, I don't think.
Put it before the screen.
It depends on what
Here,
you're
come in front of the
looking for.
screen for the Zoom people.
Good job. Hi, Zoom people.
We need the microphone.
So to answer that question, where can you go? I think it really depends on the insurance that you have. We have Kaiser up here, but we also have medical groups up here. I know that, and I'm going to put Mike in here too because St. Mary does have a medical group, Heritage Victor Valley Medical Group. We're all doing everything that we can to work within the constraints that we have. We are an HMO specialist, so if you have HMO, Heritage, that's what we do all day, every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we are a full risk payer, which means that everything that you get from your insurance, we pay for that. So we're not held to constraints about what the insurance is going to approve or what they're not going to approve because we're the payer. So we become our doctors are actually the decision makers on that kind of stuff. They put in an authorization, depending on what it is, as long as it's appropriate care. I mean, we're not going to do brain surgery for a broken elbow. That just doesn't make sense. So you don't have to do a lot of research if you're looking for local good health care. I know I used to work for High Desert Primary Care, which is now the St. Mary's Medical Group. They have good care. I work for Heritage now for 7 years. We have good care, and it isn't dependent on the insurances. I don't mean to say that they don't. You can take a grievance to the insurance company if you don't think that what we say is right. That's always an option. But good care is out there if you just pursue it and you look for it. And you can question your doctor, for heaven's sakes. Don't go into the doctor's office and just take what he says as gospel. You have to do some research. You need to find out. And it's okay to say to your doctor, you know what, I would really like to get an opinion from another physician. That's perfectly okay, and that's within the standards of good health care. So, I mean, to say that we don't have a system up here that is equal to, my son just got back from Germany, he was in the Air Force, fortunately, but I know what their systems are like. We went over there, and it's a different type of medicine. They don't have, in most European countries, they don't have the advances that we have here. America, say what you want about it, has the greatest health care on the planet. You can't go anywhere and get better care. That's why people come here. They don't come here because they like our capitalism. They come here because they know they're going to get the best health care anywhere in the world. So, you know, just, sorry for the commercial.
Fine.
Thank you so much. And, you know,
Explain the hell out of me.
and the truth of the matter is, yes, we do have amazing healthcare. What I saw personally in my job for many years, though, was there were so many people who couldn't afford it. And that's what we, you know, how do we find a way to make sure that that's available to everyone? So that's really the $50 million question.
Medicare is for everyone who is 65 and older. You know, there's nothing you do about the $100 a month that you got to pay to CMS. That's part of it. But you sign your benefits over with a Medicare Advantage plan, and you get access to everything that somebody with private insurance gets through most medical groups up here. So it is affordable because that's what it is. Some companies provide health care benefits, some don't. But IEHP is a good example of if your company doesn't provide you with health care and you're not Medicare aged, you can go to Inland Empire Health Plan, and it is a Medi-Cal HMO. And we accept those patients as part of our medical group. So they would get the same care as anybody else walking in the door. Our doctors don't ask what kind of insurance do you have because they don't care. They're employed by us. They work for us. They take care of our patients. They couldn't care less what your insurance is. So, I mean, the insurance is not always the important part of what we do because we have an employed staff. They're there Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And that's what they do. They see patients. They don't. If they ever ask you what kind of insurance you have, I want you to call me and tell me, and they'll never do it again. I promise you, because it's none of their damn business. I mean, seriously, you're there as a patient, and that's what their job is to take care of you as a patient. And I'm adamant about that. I don't care what. I'm not afraid of that. Anyway, sorry.
No, thanks so much. Go ahead.
Are you familiar with Pharmaceuticals?
Yes.
Okay. So I read Beth Macy's book, Bubser, on that, and she talks about the journey from this, you know, the discovery that this OxyContin and the opiates, what it created, and the amount of deaths that were there, and it was decades of battling a pharmaceutical company to get them to stop killing people, right? So, is there more examples of that from your experience where the people have actually gone in and been able to stop these companies, or maybe make them change their tactics, or, you know, to benefit the people, right? I mean.
So the question was about Purdue Pharmaceuticals. They're the manufacturer of OxyContin, and that's a particularly egregious example. It's, you know, I'm glad you brought it up. It's the worst example out there. Because the truth of the matter is that they developed, but, you know, like anything, they started to believe their own PR, that no one should ever be in any pain ever. But then they started to sell more OxyContin into states than potential patients. And you saw, like, if anybody really dug into it, you could tell that this was just too much drug going into too many specific places. And, you know, we've all heard about West Virginia. So I wouldn't say that's rampant, but I would say that that can happen. And that's why, you know, I mean, look, we all are pro-business. We want to make sure that we don't over-regulate, but there are times where we need to make sure that we're watching and protecting our public and not just letting companies have all the power. And that's an example of unchecked power, and I mean, it costs millions of lives, and And we have a real mess to clean up as a result of it. And right now, we're not even able to address it because of the pandemic. There's a lot of people suffering right now.
I do not mean to be an apologist for Purdue Pharmaceutical, but let's make sure that the whole story there with them is out. If I remember correctly, and please, anyone correct me if I'm wrong here, but they also have for the doctors that you can't allow a patient, if they say that they're in pain, you have to prescribe them certain medication. There's also something in the system that helped on that OxyContin to get it out of control. Again, I'm not trying to defend Purdue, but we also have some things systemic in the system where doctors are afraid, because if you say that the doctor did not take care of me properly or this, they can be sued. So they would just go ahead and say, here, if this is what you need. And we had to change some things in the system.
Absolutely. I will say this though, if you dig a little bit deeper, Purdue had a lot to do with creating those guidelines.
Oh, did they? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's kind of sickening. You know, and as somebody who has spent my whole career wanting to make sure that we make people better, things like that are really troubling. But that is actually,
I did not know that.
yeah,
Thank you very much.
yeah. So, are there any other questions? Because I want to make sure I don't monopolize the rest of the meeting, but I've been so grateful to have the time to speak with you all.